The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, this is Stefan speaking from Sigfox Support. I will try to present the Sigfox Cloud service and interfaces. Please feel free to ask on the chat session if you have some question. Okay, the first thing to note will be about the Backend GUI, then the organization and hierarchy that applies to the backend objects. We'll have a short presentation of the service map, and afterwards the API and callback. Okay, to start with the Backend GUI, first of all, you have to have an account. This account is accessible through internet, so you have to provide to get an internet access. Then have a computer with the correct date time. We remind you that all Sigfox interfaces are used through HTTPS, meaning that you have a certificate, and in order for this certificate to work, you have at least to have a correct date time and a recent browser like Chrome, Safari, or Firefox. And the account on the backend is associated with an email account. So in order to have access, you have to provide your email account, then you'll be granted through a simple email. On the Backend GUI, when you will log in, you will find a simple interface that might differ from the one that you are currently that is currently displayed on the screen. The backend interface is quite simple, but is related with the accounts that you have and the rights that you have. So it might differ. It might be a little different than this one. The Backend GUI have the first part on the Sigfox logo. You have sorry, I am disturbed. On the Sigfox logo, you can recall the main menu. Then you have a tab interface with the different portion of the backend that you can access. And for each different categories, you have different category items. You have also a global entry point where you can see your login profile, you can see the different events, and log out. When you log in and click on the device list, you will have access to the list of your device, and from there will be a recall of the selected category. So in this case, it will be the device list, and you might have some action button related to that category. In this case, it's a new series and edit series. And you might have filter condition. Those filter will allows you to filter the list that will appear. If you are managing tens of devices, they won't be mandatory. But if you are managing thousands of devices, the filter list will be quite helpful. You have also a recount of the number of devices that are displayed in case of device list. The same happens for device type, users, and groups. And you have the page that is remain just below the list. You might find also some filter operation like save your filter, reset the filter list, or recall a filter. By clicking on the wheel, you will be able to alter the different columns that are displayed. So in the case of device list, you might be able to, for example, select to display the activation date and remove, for example, the device type, or get the last purge or the pack directly on this list. Remember that the number of columns are quite fixed, so if you add an item to be displayed, you have to remove another one from display. About the hierarchy, the Sigfox backend, which is called the Sigfox OSS, is organized in a hierarchy kind of organization. At the top of the hierarchy, there's a root group for Sigfox Corp. Then on this root group, you will find different distributors. So the SOs, those SOs will give the different users access to device and groups and so on. Each user is considered as a channel, a customer, and this customer can have his own organization inside its own group. For example, on the root group, we'll find Sigfox Corp. Then on the distributor group, you might find Sigfox Germany, and under Sigfox Germany, you might find different customers like Deutsche Telekom or so on. Each of those customers can have their own group with, for example, HR, integration, production, and so on. People from a group cannot see the other group, the side groups, but you have to remind that your SO, your distributor, is allowed to see all your groups. Inside one defined group, you will find some distributor roles, some user roles, sorry. The distributor will have an admin role, so your SO have an admin role. And inside the different group, you might get different roles depending of your organization. The first person that will be created linked with a group will be the administrator of this group. Then this administrator will grant all those users different roles. For example, it can be another administrator, but it can be someone that have only access to the readability upon the device, or someone that have only access to contracts and so on. Depending of the user group, the user will see a different interface. For example, a user with only access to devices might not be able to see the device type and so on. Now we'll explain a little about device and device types. Inside Sigfox, we have added the notion of device type because the aim of IoT is to have a large number of devices that are connected. It's not convenient at all to manage them one by one. So we have this notion of device types, which is a family of device. Those family of devices is a group of device with exactly the same behavior. They are linked to the same order, the same contract in terms of subscription level and duration, and they belong to one unique group. Inside those those family of device, they will share the same behavior when a message arrived, when an event arrived, and so on. So depending of the kind of event, it will trigger for all the device type the same behavior. The device notion is a unique device, so each device has its own unique ID and one property title for each owner, which is called the PAC, Portable Authorization Code. As the device has been spread among the world, each ID, in order to recognize the owner of this device ID, the owner have to register this ID with the PAC, the Portable Authorization Code, which is a one-time code that will allow him to have access, as full access to this device. If this owner wants to share or to send this device to someone else, it has to provide the new portable authorization code, the unique one-time password that is associated to the ID, in order to for the other user to register this ID. Once the other user will have registered this ID with the portable authorization code, then a new portable authorization code, so a new one-time password, will be generated, and the old one will be discarded. In order, so to manage a device, we have the family of device and device type. Inside one channel, so one group, you can find one or many device types. Each device type will be one family of device, and you can have multiple family of device per device type, per group, sorry. So each device type has the same behavior as we have seen, and a customer from will start with the order. So as we have seen, the device type is linked to one contract. You can have more than one contract per customer, but each device type has to be linked to only one contract. And if there is a customer on the first channel, he will be able to see all the device type from all of the subgroups. But if there's a customer on the group one, displayed here, he won't be able to see the device from the group 2 or the channel 1. One word about the service map. When you log into the Sigfox backend, you will have access to the service map that will allow you to see the coverage, the predicted coverage from your own SO. You have first on this page, the way to access the service map is to click on the Sigfox logos and service map. Then you have around here the service map. The service map, the territory selection. So each territory is SO as its own service map. Then the installation type, Sigfox device ready and forecasts that will alter the service map. I will describe that later. And you can enter a specific place, an address, to find this service map. Sorry, just interrupting my messages, because otherwise I won't be able to display anything. So, coming back to the webinar, the service map, we have the service overlap for max link budget. This service overlap for max link budget is when you are outdoor, so not inside a building. If you select the 20 dB attenuation, the other option, you will find the indoor coverage of your network provider. Then you have the product class. Each product has a product class, which is the amount of power that this device can emit on the air interface. And depending of this power, you will find a different service map, because of course, if a device emits with a very low signal, you will have access to a lower portion of the network. Then some operators might display not only the current service, but also a service that will be a predictive service coverage, especially for operators that have development that are under deployment. Okay, this is the main part, API and callbacks. Now that you are quite familiar with the interface, we have three ways to access data from devices. The first one, it has been described here, is the web portal interface with the GUI that will allow to access any cloud function depending of your privilege. So it might be only devices, messages, but also service map, billings, and so on. The second way to access data is from API. So you can use the backend to request as a pooling method quite every function interconnect that are displayed on the GUI. So you can have access to the device message, you can have access to the registration of your device, to display the group list, and so on. Lastly, you have what is called the callback, which is the push mechanism. So instead of pulling the OSS, the backend, you will get directly message to your server whenever an event occurs. The most known callbacks are callbacks linked to device messages. So once a new message arrived, you will receive as a push message on your server a new request with the data that you have set. Of course, using the web portal is quite convenient starting with development, but as soon as you will have to handle a number of devices, you will mostly get access to the backend using either API or callbacks. So callback will be the definitive method to access dynamic event-based data, and API mostly to manage data or have a recovery from incident. So in order to access the API, you will first have to create an API. An API can be seen as a user, but with very specific kind of login password. And as for users, it has to be linked to roles. So in order to create a new API, you will first get to the groups that you want to create an API from. You will select then the API access option, then click on the new button here to create a new API login password. Then you can enter the name of your API. This is purely description, and the time zone that are applicable to this API. then you will have to grant this API some roles as for users. As soon as you will click on OK, you will get on the API access page the login and password of your API. So in this case, just after the creation, you have a login that starts with 58 and the password that starts with 31. You will have the name of the person that have created the API, and also you can have access to the API documentation by clicking on API documentation. When you click on the API documentation, linked to the permission that this API has been granted, you will find the description of the different API start point. So for example, on these APIs that have been created, I have access to group API, group list, information, creation, edition, and deletion. That means that I have at least a read and write role because I can edit and delete and create a group. And for each portion of the code, you can click on it and see the description of the API endpoint, so different parameters that you have to get and retrieve from the OSS. The callback are linked to a device type. So if you remind well, the device type is a family of devices that behave exactly the same. So when you create a new callback on, you have to create it on a device type. So you go to your specific device type. When selected, for example, this one is key PA BSS, you will have access to a subcategory called callbacks. And under this new subcategory, you have a new button. With this new button, you will have access to different kind of callbacks. So either callbacks from Amazon, Microsoft, but also what is called a custom callback that will be detailed here. So most of you will have yes, their own platform or different platforms at Amazon or Microsoft. So in this case, you will create a custom callback, and then you will have access to different callback settings. The first one is the kind of trigger that will raise this callback. So in the case of messages, because this is for devices, you will have access to either the data, incoming data, or service messages or error messages. I will start with service and errors. The service messages are linked to a very specific part of the library of Sigfox firmware. In case of service, it's like keep alive messages that are sent through the library using the keep alive method, what is called out of band messages. So I won't detail them quite deep in this webinar because you have to be a developer and have access to the library to create them. So error callback type is linked to a certain case of event when you find, for example, that there is some messages missing, or, for example, if your device is off contract. In the case of data message callbacks, so messages that has been received by the backend from your object, you will first have to select the callback mode, uplink or bidirectional. Uplink will be raised for any kind of incoming messages, and bidirectional ones is only for messages that request bidirectional methods, so what is called downlink. Then you will have access to the communication channel. Usually you have the choice between URL, batch URL, and email. The email is just receiving the callbacks through your email, which is quite convenient when you start to develop or to do a simple proof of concept. But as soon, of course, as you start with the platform, you will have to get either URL or batch URL mode. The difference between the two is that with URL, any event, any new incoming message will trigger the callback, and then the callback will be sent to the address defined in the URL pattern. But in case of batch URL, any new incoming message will trigger also the URL, but then the message won't be sent exactly at that time. There will be a 1 second delay, and in this 1 second delay, if any other device from this device type is triggering again this callback, it will be added as a new row, for example, in your callback. So it's quite convenient, and I insist in it because when you start to develop your platform and you have only a few devices or hundreds of devices, there's really no need to use either URL or batch URL. It will be the same. But when you have thousands and hundreds of thousands of devices, you might want to use the batch URL in order to get less callback per second, because otherwise, if your device are sending a lot of message, then you will receive a lot of requests from the backend, which might be not as convenient as possible to handle. You will have also access to the send duplicate. So a callback is triggered each time a frame is received. You have to remind that any Sigfox device currently will send 3 frames per message, and upon each reception, so if these 3 frames are received by 3 different base stations, you will have 9 duplicates, or 1 proper frame and 8 duplicates. So it's exactly the same. So you can select either to receive only 1 message per message reception, or 1 message per frame reception, which is quite huge. Then you might have a custom payload config. So it's just a raw parsing of your payload. Usually when you are using a platform, you won't use this one because the grammar is quite poor. Then you can set either the variables that you want to send in your get URL, or if you want to use the post method, you can have directly those variable inside the post body. And you have the choice also of in terms of get, post, and put methods to receive different parameters. You have then the send SNI, which is the SNI extension for TLS. I suggest to click on it. So don't forget to click on it if you are using a shared platform like a shared instance on a web hoster server. If you only unclick it if you have some issue with TLS, but usually it's better with it. And you can configure some custom headers and values if you want, for example, to have a specific API key or something like that to be sent with the callback. Lastly, when the callback is created, you have under the callback the list of callbacks that are applicable, and you have to select enable to raise the callback when this event occurs. Okay, so it was quite a short presentation. First of all, I will see if you have some question, then we'll go back inside the maybe deeper on specific topics. So use the chat portion of the webinar to go to webinar to ask your question. I don't know if some of you have already. No, there is nothing in the chat part. Okay.
Thank you, thank you, Stefan. Guys, if you want to ask question, you can also raise the hand into the menu. And so, if you prefer to talk, then to chat. No questions?
Okay. So if there's no question, I will detail a little more about the difference between API and callbacks because it's quite important.
I think I have a question,
those
Stefan.
Okay.
If you
Perfect.
go into questions, I can open it actually. Oh, there are two questions.
Oh, perfect.
Can you see them? Yeah.
I'm trying to see them, but currently no.
Okay. So first one is from Jérôme, and he's asking if my company is using a Loca, so I suppose it's the Loca device.
Yes.
And sends data via Sigfox. Do I use the Loca device application or the Sigfox device application or both?
Well, you can use both. In fact, from the Sigfox point of view, Loca is seen as any kind of device. If you use the Loca application, you will, of course, have access to the Loca platform and so have access to all the added value made by Loca that is quite specific to your device. But if you want to have to hack it, for example, and to use it in a different way, the best thing is to create your own application. So create your own callbacks and maybe have access to the API if you want to do something else that is not provided by Loca. You can use both of them at the same time, depending of your device provider. So your device provider, in this case Loca, might allows you to have their own callbacks as well as your own, or some of the device provider want to keep the data from themselves and present only their device. In this case, well, you have both not a device but a solution, and in this case the solution is a solution from your device provider. So it's not really your device. So I don't know the policy of Loca on their device. I know that some device manufacturer is quite open on this part, so they let you have access to their platform as well as your own. And some other want to cut the link between their platform and yours. In this case, usually they prevent the user from accessing the raw data.
Okay. Thank you, Stefan. There's another question from Raphael. So Raphael is using the send duplicate marker, and the platform is using, which is a Thinger.io, who responds with too many requests. And it's a problem because I guess the server doesn't register the date from more than one base station. So to me, it's more limitation on the platform, but I'll let you answer.
Yes. it's a limitation on the platform. Usually the Things.io is a freemium platform, so you have access to a limited number of callbacks or devices at the same time, unless if you pay for it, and you will have access to the full number of callbacks and device. So in this case, your problem is really that you want to use the free version of the platform, but you want to receive duplicates. So in this case, you might receive more than 10 frames at the same time, which will be blocked by the Things.io platform. So yeah, you cannot use the Things.io platform as well as send duplicate in this case.
Okay, thank you. I was actually thinking, can you instead use the API to retrieve the data, and would you receive the duplicates using the API? I don't know about this option.
You might be able to receive the duplicates. The main issue with retrieving the duplicates through APIs, it will be the part of API for beginners, is that it's not convenient at all to base your application on this part. In this case, you should get your duplicates through the callbacks method on your own server. So you can create a link to the Things.io to have their platform. Then you can have a second callback linked to your server, your own server, and get the data, the duplicates data from this one. So you can have two different sources. You can, I have not precised it through the callbacks, but you can have more than one callback per trigger. So if you want to do, for example, a crash-proof platform with two hosts on two different hosters, you might want to have two different callbacks, one to your first host and the second one to your second host. So in case of crash, you might be able to recover the data on the second platform.
Okay, thank you, Stefan.
Okay, so I will go shortly. If you have some question, feel free to use the raise hand and so on. I can't see them, but obviously I will have some help. In any case, so I will start with Sigfox for beginners. I want to share it. So just hold on 1 minute. Okay, this is it. So API Sigfox for beginners. About this, I don't know if you are able to see it because it's telling me that the screen is paused.
We can see the first page.
Okay, perfect. I'm not sure that you will be able to see everything, but in any case, you can ask on support.sigfox.com access to the document, and the same has happened for callback creation from callback, Atlas callback, and so on. In the first of all, about this document, I'll try to display it. Yeah, should be. I have plenty of pop-ups. Well, okay, never mind. The first part of this document is trying to explain when to use the API and when to use the callback. So as we have seen, we have 3 different interfaces: graphical for very starts, callbacks for automatic message that has for events that has triggered, and API to pull or create a specific request or alter some data. Usually, to use the API, you will use them to retrieve exceptional data. For example, you have a crash on your server and you want to recover the messages from Sigfox directly. So in this case, you will use the get-message API, but usually to retrieve a single message, it won't be efficient. Let's take an example. I have one object sending 140 messages per day. So that means if I want to get those messages through API and I want to have a live retrieve, I will use the API get message every second, which means that 86,000 times per day I will use the get message API. But when using it, only 140 times per day, so different about only 1% of the time, I will have new messages. So it's not really convenient. It's not also efficient, because for one device, you might be able to do that. But for tens of devices, thousands of devices, or hundreds of thousands of devices, it won't work. So you have to remind that those API has to be used in a very exceptional way, because you won't be able, it won't be scalable to use this kind of thing through the API. The same happen to any things that is event-based. For example, in order to control if a device is sending a frame for the first time, you have events based on the device that are quite convenient to use for this kind of this case. If you try to do that using the pull method, you will end up with a lot of inefficient pooling method, because you will have this information change once in the life of the device. So if you do that each day and your device has a 4-year runtime, then it's only 1 day per 4 year. So it's quite inconvenient. So you have to remind that most of the triggered events should use callbacks to get the data from it. On the other part, if you want to move a device from one device type to another, for example, or you want to access the API to see if one place is covered, then in this case, you will use, because it's an exceptional one, the API. So I'll try to, I'm not sure that you are able to see the pages, so I will try just to display this page. Yep. The API request is based on the REST method. So you have, for example, the explanation from the documentation of the coverage prediction there. So you will end up accessing a URL, backend.cfos.com/API/coverage/global/prediction, as displayed in the documentation. Then you have to get your latitude and longitude parameters. So you will have lat equal and the value of your latitude, LNG equal and the value of your longitude, and you will get the reply using the same displayed information the same information as displayed in the documentation. For example, in this case, you will have for a specific location the applicable margin, which means the amount of the coverage that you have from the 3 best base stations that recover these points. You have also in this document some sample of requests with different programming languages. So the most basic ones that you will use to test will be the curl command line, and you can have, of course, access to those using Python, Java, and so on. Then you have to interpret the data retrieved, and you have 2 kinds of interpretations. The first one will come from the HTTP code that you will receive when you access this page. If you try to access the page, for example, without any login password associated with the API, you will get a 403, which means access denied, or a 401, authentication credentials were not present. Then you have the 200 methods that will display the data, at least get the data from it, from your request. If you have, for example, no coverage at all, you might not find in some request some numeric data. In this case, it might be NA or something like that. Everything is displayed in the documentation, so read carefully the documentation for the input and especially the output with the different values that you can have in return, in order to be sure to well interpret the value and not have a type error. For example, when you expect to have an integer value and you have a text value because you have an error on the specific request, and it will be a text human understandable value. So the last part of the document, well, you should try to read it. It's when the API should not be used and when the API should be used compared to callbacks, because when you talk about API, you will also talk about callbacks, and you have to get them both to have a good integration. You have to remind when you are creating a platform from scratch that first of all your device itself, you will have to register it. And if it's only once per month or once per year, you might use the GUI. But if you are trying to register a device each time, for example, an end user has this device in its hand, then you will use the API to register the device and put it in the correct device type. So you have to get the API to do that. When you will try to recover message from a device, you have to think about callbacks, because you will get the callback by push mechanism. And as soon as those callback will hit your server, you might want to process the data and maybe send something back to the device or alter the device to move it from one device type to another and so on. So you might link the callbacks and API to do the complete sequence depending on your application. You might also want to monitor for each device if the device has sent the correct message, the correct sequence message, if there is one missing, if this message missing is an important one or not, and so on. So each of those are really linked to your application, and you have to consider the application in order to create the good interaction between API, callbacks, and GUI. So you have to think about with a complete from scratch application where and when to retrieve the data from the backend, how to retrieve it through callbacks, through API, through GUI, in order to create a good integration. Okay, I think everything is covered. We have a few minutes, less than 10 minutes. So if you have some more requests, please raise your hand or send something through the chat. Okay, no more question?
I don't think we have any.
Okay. Okay, so if you have any questions that comes back later, feel free to ask in ask.sigfox.com or directly to support.sigfox.com. We'll be happy to answer to all your question, even if you have some request about how to create an API from scratch, to create a platform from scratch, what is really important, and so on. So feel free to ask. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stéphane.
And bye-bye. Sorry for the little interruption due to pops up everywhere on my computer.
No problem. Bye, everyone.
Bye.